A 4S memo signed in a sealed cabinet room in Ottawa have sent global markets into gridlock. On July 8, 2025, Canada enacted its first formal restriction on U.S. foreign market access since NAFTA's signing in 1994. The order halted all federal-level procurement from any U.S.-based company not operating on Canadian soil. It triggered a freeze on $14.88 billion in U.S. contracts overnight. The first casualties weren't symbolic. They were logistical. A Calgary Transit expansion lost its American electrical supplier. Hydro-Quebec suspended an Oklahoma-based turbine contract mid-invoice. Toronto's Joe Rail announced delays, citing, supplier integrity protocol shifts. Within 6 hours, the Canadian dollar surged 1.3%, while the S&P/TSX Industrials Index spiked 2.1%, signaling confidence at home and confusion abroad. Donald Trump was briefed at 4:42 a.m. Washington time. He reportedly slammed the table hard enough to knock over a mug labeled America First. The retaliation had arrived, but the method, timing, and structure defied Washington's expectations and may have permanently rewritten the rules of North American economic warfare. Just 34 days earlier, on June 4th, Trump doubled steel and aluminum tariffs to 50%, invoking Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. The justification, national security. The reality, 41% of U.S. steel imports came from allies Canada, Mexico, and the EU, who are now cast as economic threats. The contradiction, America invoked a Cold War clause against NATO's founding members. Canada had options: WTO challenge, G7 petition, back-channel diplomacy. It chose none of them. Instead, Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled a trade doctrine that rejected protests and replaced it with infrastructure exclusion. In short, if the U.S. insists on penalizing Canadian metal, Canada would block U.S. access to Canada's industrial future. Washington's steel lobby didn't anticipate this. Neither did Boeing, which had just secured a $2 for billion Canadian airframe parts contract. The cancellation notice came at 9:12 a.m. Eastern, just as Boeing stock opened. It fell 1% in under an hour. Dubbed the Reciprocal Access Framework, Canada's new doctrine demands that any foreign firm bidding on public contracts must operate at least 50% of its manufacturing footprint within Canada or a formal FTA partner. No exceptions, not for defense, not for energy, not for legacy U.S. papers, U.S. flyers. The policy uses a 3-tier compliance mechanism, origin traceability, ensuring parts aren't rerouted through third countries, domestic labor ratio audits, and raw material sourcing certifications. All bidders must pass quarterly reviews or be frozen out. This isn't a tariff. It's market denial. And in a procurement economy worth over $120 billion annually in Canada alone, the implications are more lasting than any tax. In 2018, the Trump administration issued Executive Order 13881 demanding maximum use of American-made iron and steel in federal procurement. That document, cited at the time as a model of economic nationalism, is now being mirrored in Canada's Build Domestic First decree. The irony is layered. Canada's retaliatory tool is built using American design and try to restrict allies' exports. The U.S. may have inspired the very exclusion that now blocks its market access. Even more paradoxical, the Canadian directive draws legal cover from the same Section 232 logic Trump used: security of critical infrastructure supply. In effect, both countries are using the same legal architecture to justify mutually exclusive exclusions. But only one is doing so while still honoring its free trade commitments. According to trade scholars at McGill University, let's hit the brakes because Canada didn't just retaliate, it rewrote the game board. Unlike prior disputes where retaliatory tariffs hit back pound for pound, Canada embedded incentives into the exclusion. Ottawa opened an $11.2 billion co-financing pool for any foreign firm willing to move manufacturing into Canada. South Korea's POSCO immediately signed a memorandum to relocate cold roll processing to Ontario. Siemens began exploring a power tech facility in Manitoba. The goal isn't just revenge, it's relocation. In effect, Canada weaponized U.S. exclusion to become a magnet for reindustrialization. This is not a tariff fight. It's a competitive redirection, and it's backed by legislation, capital, and geopolitical timing. The trade frees its domestic U.S. suppliers hardest, but leaves the door wide open for U.S. headquartered multinationals that already operate inside Canada. GE, Ford, and GM remain eligible under the new rules because their Canadian plants meet localization thresholds. Smaller U.S. suppliers, however, with no footprint north of the border, have effectively been locked out. Meanwhile, German firms with Canadian subsidiaries are benefiting. Bosch, already operating in Kitchener, secured a $64 million component contract 2 days after the directive passed. Japanese manufacturers like Komatsu have fast-track compliance plans, and China is watching but not engaging. The results: Canada hasn't just punished its adversary, it's redistributed the spoils to competitors more agile under rule of origin scrutiny. In Washington, Trump's team expected Mexico to align against Ottawa. That didn't happen. President Claudia Sheinbaum declined to condemn the move, instead issuing a statement emphasizing, in her words, Mexico's sovereign right to pursue parallel industrial strategy. The EU's approach was quieter but clearer. Brussels accelerated its 2030 Green Steel Accord and invited Canadian partners to joint venture discussions. Finland's Adaku, a major stainless steel supplier, announced a feasibility study in Nova Scotia. At the WTO, the case is stuck in procedural deadlock. The U.S. filed a complaint citing unjustified market discrimination. Canada responded by invoking the U.S.'s own Section 232 use in its defense. The tribunal deferred a hearing pending clarification of national security clauses in bilateral procurement law, a process expected to take 14 months. In short, multilateralism blinked, bilateral exclusion held, and time at this point favors Canada. The Midwest is now feeling the heat. As of July 9th, the American Iron and Steel Institute reported a 9.3% week-over-week decline in cross-border orders. Oshkosh Defense warned of potential layoffs tied to a stalled contract in British Columbia. Steel Dynamics paused expansion plans in Indiana, citing what they called North American procurement instability. Even companies exempt under Canada's framework are honestly pretty nervous. Ford's Canadian operations meet the criteria, but Michigan-based suppliers that feed into those operations may be cut from future bids unless they also localize. Republican governors in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin have called for what they describe as retaliatory clarity. The Trump administration, however, remains committed to the tariff increase until new downstream exemptions can be drafted. There is no consensus, only collision. Prime Minister Carney insists this isn't protectionism, it's protection. In his July 8th press conference, he stated, "We are not closing our markets. We are conditioning access to them. If the United States imposes a barrier, we are adjusting our alignment in real time." This framing matters. It's not just rhetoric, it's strategic positioning. By avoiding tariffs and instead using procurement exclusions and localization incentives, Canada skirts WTO violations while retaining leverage. The approach was described in a Financial Times editorial as economic aikido, using an opponent's force against them without ever striking directly. But not everyone buys it. Critics inside Canada warn that closing access to long-standing United States suppliers can invite downstream supply shocks, especially in industries like rail and construction equipment. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce has asked for a dual compliance carve-out for hybrid United States-Canadian firms. For now, Ottawa is holding the line. The deepest contradiction in this conflict: North America's supply chains were designed to be invisible, to move freely across borders, guided only by cost and efficiency. Now they're being color-coded by nationality. When the United States labels Canadian steel a threat, and Canada treats United States suppliers as non-domestic, the result isn't sovereignty, it's fragmentation. The very integration the USMCA was designed to preserve is now being dissected for strategic purposes. And yet both countries claim to be defending industrial resilience. The real question is whether this fragmentation builds strength or whether it hollows out the system that made North America competitive in the first place. Steel and aluminum were just the ignition switch. What's being tested now is the viability of a new blueprint, one where market access is contingent on geopolitical loyalty, physical presence, and traceable origin. If Canada's model succeeds and early indicators suggest investor confidence is rising, others may follow. Australia has already floated a similar localization rule. India is exploring procurement nationalization as a response to United States tariff pressures. In trying to isolate foreign materials, the United States may have set off a global realignment of trade norms, where allies no longer assume free access, but must now earn it. What do you think? Is Canada's steel firewall a model of modern industrial defense, or the start of a dangerous unraveling of global supply logic? Will other allies copy this blueprint, or will retaliation only escalate? Drop your take in the comments below. We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe.